With AI comes great power, great responsibility, but also a ton of bad content. And today I want to talk about how I think that all product teams, everything that you've ever known about shipping software is fundamentally changing. I'm a practitioner of this. I've been building software as a product designer, a product manager, and an engineer for about a decade, and got really into all of the LLM stuff when GPT-3.5 came out in April 2 years ago. And I want to walk through all of my thoughts on how AI will build the first single-person billion-dollar company, and we'll go backwards a little bit. So for those folks that don't have all the context of what this means, this will be really helpful. And then for those advanced engineers, advanced developers that are always looking for the next, Clyde or Claude Dev or Aider or new model, this will be good for you too. Just stick around. So as I mentioned, I think there's just so much information out there, and these newsjacking videos where a new thing comes out and you got to test it, it's actually not that helpful, because if you test every single one of them, you're just wasting time. So having a strong filter is the best way possible. I like to let a little bit of signal come through the noise and see some people actually using it, and then build a little bit of conviction before I jump in and start using a new tool. My current stack is I'm using Cursor. So this is the go-to, and I'm using the Composer, and I'm using a bunch of different prompts and different keyboard expanders, and those are actually built into the settings on Mac. You can get these on Windows as well, but it's just using Cursor and Claude's newest model, and that's for actual code execution. And then I'm using a chain of thought model, so O1 preview for planning. I find that to be pretty helpful. It will go through and think about the things, and I think that that's really awesome too. On some of the bits and pieces of the actual text expander, so what you do in Mac is you just type in keyboard and you go in, and under keyboard, you will see text replacements. And then you can see I have a bunch in here. I have analyze, architect, ask, bug, comments, copy, critique, don't, Eli 5, explain like I'm 5, end. This is something that I was trying out where you can have a start and an end prompt for reloading the context, basically destroying context of the previous window, because as you know, these models, they have windows. And it's similar to the days of bandwidth when you didn't have enough bandwidth getting to your iPhone or your Android, so you couldn't stream a video. Context is having that same sort of bottleneck right now. And that's what this end workflow does. Explain, feature, graph, next. This one's language specific. Plan, tree. So I also have some bash things in here, some shell commands where it'll generate a tree. Types, YouTube. This one's actually just for ripping YouTube audio. So that's really helpful. Think step by step and then shrug. So all of these, if you want, I will put them in the description below. Let me actually write that down, because sometimes I just say these things and I don't actually do them. So just for expanders. And that's the current flow for the expanders. And I also find myself using this toggle floating notes a lot. So this is through Raycast, which is a launcher. And this, just having this like little notepad that floats around, is really helpful for my own context and for reloading my cache, because you sit down, you get deep into work, and then you come back and you want to actually write where you left off. So when I left off at 2 a.m. last night, I thought of this feature where there was a dynamic tab. And so, okay. Then I have these different directories. So .ai has a bunch of different things in it, and it has a bunch of different team members in it. So a number of years ago, when I was working at a startup that my friend started, we had a full staff. We had QA engineering team that was offshore. Actually, I'll start from the top. We had a product manager, which was the role that I filled. I worked directly with the CEO, and we would figure out what is it that we need to build for the business. Then I would spend time with the customers. We were a food delivery company, so I'd go spend time with the drivers. I would go and spend time with the customers, and I would go and spend time with the restaurants. And that was the role of the product managers, to figure out what is this problem that people are facing? Are they willing to pay money for it? Is there a theme to this problem that we're trying to solve? Is this a revenue generating product? Is this a life improvement for a quality of life improvement theme product? Is this a DX improvement for developers? There's different themes you could have, but that was the role. And then after that, it kind of goes in sequence where every team kind of works like this, where the product manager is the one that's responsible for getting the team to row in the same direction. Steve Jobs famously was amazing at getting the team first at Pixar and then later Apple to get developers and designers to work harmoniously. Sometimes there's a battle there. So that was the role of the product manager. And as you can see, I'm trying to emulate parts of that into an actual team member. So what were the things that I did for 7 years that was really helpful? And can I distill that into, a 94-line prompt? Probably not, but it can do some of it. And I think that this is where it's going. This is kind of what I'm getting at, is that I don't think that these side windows, which while they are helpful, and even the voice assistants where you're unloading and reloading context, and you should check out Indie Dev Dan on YouTube. He is one of the biggest innovators in the space in terms of pushing forward where agents are going. But I think that this is where it's going, where you'll have each one of these roles. So, as I had explained, first you'd have that product manager, and then typically I would go and I would sit with our engineer who architects the system. We're not writing any code. He's not writing any code. I'm not designing anything. We're talking through this one pager that I've written, which is the pitch, which I would go through. What is that problem that we're trying to solve? I would figure out what our appetite for the problem was. How much are we willing to spend on time? Because these are bets. Any sort of product work is a bet. And we'd figure out from high level, what are the technical decisions we need to make? And that's what you see with this, the software architect. And I've taken pieces from the prompt that you've seen with Aider, if you've seen my videos on that, where there's different types of modes where you can prompt the coding agent. An architect is one that does not write complete code. It's not just spitting out a bunch of generative code. It's thinking through, how is this going to work in the system? What are the trade-offs? Do we need to reach for a library? It's an examination of the current code base, and all of these try to emulate that. And so once that was done in real life, I would then go and we'd sit with the whole team and we'd draw out a diagram. We'd take that, first step was the pitch, the one pager that I worked with the CEO on. The second step was the technical architecture of it. How is this going to work? Then we get the whole team together, make sure, hey, does this look good? Draw something on the board, make sure we're not missing anything, bring in the mobile team. And so that would be the software architect mermaid expert. And this is going and it's building out. Let me see if I have any in here. Looks like I deleted them. But it would actually build out a mermaid diagram. And a mermaid is just what, it's a diagram. So builds out that flow chart. After that, someone, mainly me, because I was product manager and product designer, would go in and take all those artifacts, all those pieces that you've worked so hard and thought about this feature. You've have the customer stories, you have the one pager, you have this conviction from the architect and the diagram, and then you're actually breaking those down into tickets. And that's important because if you don't have those, it's hard for the team to know where they're at if they're tracking. So that's what this one does. And then we get into step 5, which is that actual doer. So this one would be language specific. In my case, you're a full stack engineer tasked with implementing a new feature. I'm, teaching it, hey, we need to use React 19. Now, where this goes off the rails, and where I think this will get better, is this doesn't have context of documentation that I want. It can, I can take this and put it into Composer and say, hey, we have these tickets that are generated. We've already generated the task. Take a look at those. We already have the plan. We already have the mermaid. We have these 3 different things, right? We've already made the one pager. We've already made the technical architecture decisions. We've already made the diagram. Now we need you to take examples of what good tasks look like and make those. And it can do a pretty good job. It can put them in here, but it's not as specific because it doesn't have as much context. So I think this is where it gets better, where if this was not in this medium of just a markdown file, that you can get a lot more out of it. I think this is where these tools will go. And then after that full stack engineer, then you need someone that is specific to the polish. Because in real life, you have people that are really good at certain areas. They can go full stack, but because they're really good at full stack, that usually means that they're not fantastic at one area. It means that they might not be as good at knowing the libraries or the CSS tricks and how to use keyframes and all these things. So then once you have the thing working, it's okay, let's make this really cool. Let's get the design engineer involved. And that's in real life what would happen is I would sit as a designer, I'd put the designer hat on and I'd go and sit with the engineer and we'd take the non-real, Figma designs and we'd turn them into crude prototype, we call it steel threading, where it's just get the core usage down that solves for that problem, but then we need to make it better. So then that would happen. Then we had a QA team. Sometimes that was internally, sometimes that was externally. They'd go through, they'd test things, then a test engineer. And then I have these last two that I've recently added, which really this is about just making it so not only you as the single person on the team or the small team can quickly traverse files and get that context going, like I have with this floating note for the things that I want to do next. It's adding TS docs to the different files. So you would then say, hey, I want you to go through. This is what we're doing. Here's the files. Go and mark these things up. And so it adds in the params. If you're familiar with JS docs, it's that, but for TypeScript. And it seems redundant, but it makes it so it's easier to just get up to speed on what's going on. For any new developer, for any LLM to be able to read that, it's worth the tokens. Something worth maybe mentioning is also at the bottom here, you can see I have token count. That's helpful because I can see across these 10 different team members, it's about 5,000 tokens. And so if you take that and then you already provide examples, provide documentation, that documentation that gets scraped, that goes into the context window. And even as they get larger, there's the needle in the haystack problem where some things will get lost. And they say that there's tricks where you put the most important parts at the beginning or at the end, and it's model specific. But that's sort of where I think this is headed. And now I want to talk a little bit about just this idea of the $1 billion single person company. And I put some notes together, but it's, you have a list of these $1 billion companies with small teams. Famously, Instagram was one of the ones that was really small. They think in terms of revenue per employee, but I think that that's going to get totally changed. And I think that, yes, people do need to act now. I think that if you're using a computer, chances are that every single thing you're doing throughout your day can be improved. I think of that all the time. As I started writing those prompts, it made sense where this is where it's going. If you go to Claude, this is another tip. If you go to Claude and you go to the developer console, you can actually have them generate prompts. So that's where all these came from, where I have different ones that are not part of the team member, they're not part of the text expander, but they're to solve for a specific task. So if I want to analyze a directory and fix linting errors, there's one for that. And if I want to explain a file, there's one for that. If I want to generate pixel perfect clones, there's one for that. If I want to generate the TS docs, you saw that in the team member. If I want to extract reusable components, there's one for that. If I want an architect to generate the tickets, there's one for that. But it's really just about iterating on them and taking this and then putting it into Claude and letting it plus it up. So I might take this one, use it for a few days, realize where it's falling short, and then put in the prompt generator. Hey, this is the current prompt. Here's the problems that we're facing with it. Plus it up. and it does a great job with that. And so if I go back to this article, and I guess, since I opened this up, these are the different agents that I'm thinking about, the different team members. And we have ones that are very specific to languages. I have a lot of Postgres functions where, it took me 6 months to get one of them right. That sounds wild, but it's because I hadn't written any of them before. And I am constantly adding things to what it needs to do. So had I taken the time to build out the agent, give it the context of what goal is trying to be accomplished, give it examples, because I could search GitHub and find versions where, in this case, this one would go out and it would capture it would ingest every single calendar event, all of your access control list mechanisms and settings, all of your free busy settings, all of your, I already mentioned events, and then settings for Google Calendar. It would go through all 6 of the methods that are provided, or resource groups provided by Google, and then loop through them iteratively, batch them, paginate them, make sure you have the tokens, and bring all of those into Map, my product, in about 5 seconds. So again, had I had this specific one, that would have been really great. And let's see. Now back to this write-up, if I can just find it. So when I look across the day and I see things that I'm doing a lot of different times, I try to figure out, how am I spending my time and how can I make it better with AI? And if you're looking at your schedule, you basically have 2 things. You have the inputs or the actions that you take to accomplish a goal in your day, and then you have the outputs or the things that you'd like to get done. You can see this in examples of some of the best performers where they set big goals and then they audit. I know Keith Raboy, he's a famous investor and he's made a bunch of unicorn companies happen with his help. He always audits people's calendars. And I think that that's also where AI is going. And that's something that I'm focused on with Map, is figuring out how people are spending their time and then generating those tasks, not just development specific ones, but actually generating the tasks that are actionable items that you could do today to make progress towards your goals. I think that even goal setting will be part of Map, and that'll be a big part of it. And so in one example, if you want to be a great writer, it's really similar to logging hours when you want to become a pilot. You have to log a lot of those hours. And the common trope that's been said for years is that 10,000 hours is the number to get really good or get competent at a skill. But I think that gets changed. I think if you did 10,000 hours, but each hour is more levered, meaning you're more effective per hour, per unit of work, then you're going to be twice as good, 3 times as good, 4 times as good. And so, DHH from Basecamp says it's fun to be competent. It totally is. And spamming an AI to give it what you want is not the way to get there. It's a double-edged sword. It can be both the best thing that helps you and the thing that atrophies the muscles that you're trying to get. So this is a chart that I had an AI pull together that kind of explains, how do you get to 10,000 hours? How do you get good at something quickly? In this case, development. Well, if you do 100-hour weeks, it's going to take about 2 years. If you do 80-hour weeks, 2.4 years. But I think that this gets flipped on its head. I think it challenges the parable. I pulled together a bunch of examples of folks that didn't traditionally have the skill set. They didn't go to college for certain things. Like Elon Musk, famously had never really thought about launching rockets. Now he has them landing in chopsticks. And it's because he just outworked everybody in the room. And I think that had he had AI, he could have taken the books that he was reading and thrown them into Notebook LM and listened to it while he was on a walk. Or he could have trained a bunch of agents to teach him on the specifics of a manual of some NASA guide. So then, we have Edison, who held over 1,000 patents. You can read about his work ethic. You have Feynman, Howard Schultz, Serena, the tennis player, all these examples. In order to do stuff that is great and impact a lot of people, you have to throw your hours at it. And so I think that this mentor-student relationship also changes a lot. I think that, as AI models reach a PhD level on many different subjects, they can serve as the mentors. And I get into that a little bit more. I'll post this full article on my website. But I think that by using the best AI models and knowing how to apply them effectively, we create a pathway that resembles the mentor-student dynamic. And that we're in a point in history where knowing how to use the tools effectively gives a distinct advantage over those who do not. This learning method is like having an experienced guide who shows us where pitfalls and opportunities lie. And benchmarking has always been about identifying excellence and striving towards it, which is really similar to that relationship. So you have examples, this is not a new thing. Like ancient Greek philosophers, from Socrates mentoring Plato, who taught Aristotle, who then in turn tutored Alexander the Great. This chain of mentorship laid the groundwork for Western philosophy, ethics, and scientific thought, and showed how knowledge can grow and shape entire cultures. So forget making a $1 billion company out of a photo sharing app. Think about the ability and the effectiveness of each person that's out there when they properly leverage these tools. Another example of this is the medieval guild apprenticeships. So you have the knight and the page. The guild system passed down knowledge from master to apprentice. If you ever played Guild Wars, I think I logged like 10,000 hours on that. It was, you're part of a guild, and when you join the game, if you got to level up in that game with someone that had already done all the missions before and knew where the bosses were and the enemies and what spells to cast, you just get there faster. And that's because that person had the experience. They read the manual, so to speak. They were trained. They had the context. And so that's the power. I can get into more examples. You have the Renaissance art masters, samurai training, the scientific revolution with Newton, both the yoga and the Buddhist traditions, and startups. You probably care about startups because you're watching a tech video, but Steve Jobs mentored Zuck. A lot of people don't know that, but he credits a lot of his product thinking and wisdom to that. And so those are some examples of the mentor-student relationship. And that's what I'm saying here is you've never been a product manager before? Well, guess what? In not so long, even today with some of the markdown files that I'll share below, you can get up to speed on what is a good product manager. What are the outputs that they do? What are the inputs that they do? If you can't totally substitute the work, right? But you can get up to speed much quicker. You can make a podcast out of the top 10 product management books. You can make an assistant on the assistance platform that asks you questions that come from cracking the product interview if you want to get a job there or with that. And so I think that there's a lot of hate on the entrance of AI, but it's actually been around for a really long time. It's just that GPT is now able to generate texts. Now we're generating images. We're also generating formulas, code, all those things. This is not totally new, just so you guys know. AI has been around since the 50s. Famously, the Turing test is, can you tell if it's a human or a computer? But here's a brief timeline of it. And a little bit just on the end, I want to give some more of the tactics as well as some predictions on where I think this is going, which you should probably know by the tone of the beginning of the video. But little things like warp. So warp is a terminal. A lot of people don't like it because it requires you to log in, but who cares? It's helpful. So if I just start typing and I say generate a bash script, that you'll notice that there's this little icon. That's going to then take what I'm about to type and then turn it into the command that I need to run. I think that's really helpful. You can also attach context. So if there's a previous block that you need to use in the context of this chat, like let's say I made a bash script on my own or made some script on my own and it didn't work, then I could hit up and then type in and it would fix it. That's really helpful. I think the workflows are really helpful too. Oops. So if I hit Command P when I'm in here and I click on workflows, then you can see these different text expanders where it's, okay, for a YouTube video that I want to pull the video, it will CD into the proper thing, the proper directory. It will pull it. It will pass these arguments where then I'm just pasting the YouTube link. This is less AI related, but still helpful. If I want the audio version of it, I can do that. If I want to actually run a project, I can have it CD in there, start the database, and then do bun dev. The voice assistant Python demo, just check out Indie Dev Dan. In terms of CLI tools, this is another one that I find pretty helpful. This one's called RepoPack. I made a dedicated video on this, but I've since changed the way that I use it. So I have this config, And what it's doing is it's saying, hey, here's the file path of where we want to take every single file or directory that you include in the include array and put it in this place, put it in there. And I use XML because Claude's the best at coding, hands down, and they prefer XML. I have an instruction file path that then can be concatenated on top of the output. So it has the conventions. So I say, here are the conventions, here's the structure, here's how it works. Here's the core user flow. I haven't filled that out. Here's where the types are. Here's how we do auth. Here's where the database is. This is basically that context that it can know about the project. It's kind of like a README. And then I can put in different text. I can have it remove comments if I want to, remove empty lines. This only works in certain languages, but if you're using any popular language, it works. You have the include array, like I mentioned, the ignore, and security check looks for environment variables. So that's repo pack, and then all I would do is I just type in repo pack. The right click to add, this is another one that's pretty helpful. If you're using dedicated chat, meaning like it's in a browser and you're not using one of these, then you want to add this extension. So you do Command Shift X, and then you type in, there's the token count one, but there's like a copy paste thing or copy file, copy text of selected files. It just is what it sounds like. So if I right click something and I say copy content of selected files, it will grab this one and then I can continue stacking those. So then I can have, 6 files, 10 files, 20 files in there, and it has the tick marks around it with the file names on top. That one's really helpful. Mermaid extension, this is another one for when you're generating outputs that have mermaid diagrams in it. You're going to want to have that extension so that you can view them in Markdown. And then I mentioned these different commands. So the predictions on it is the future's bright. I think that we're in the place where the models are just bottlenecked by context, but that's going to go away. And I think that if you are constantly staying on the edge of where these things are going, and you're not just blindly following what people are putting out there, like videos like this, I think if you're actually seeing the video and then testing it and then seeing what you could do to make it better, that you'll then be the edge. And that's where I think it's going. If you found this helpful, make sure you like the video. These take a lot of effort, and that's your way of doing a good deed for the day. Also, subscribe to the channel. I'll have more videos every single week. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.